Welcome back. Before we go much further, let's do a little housekeeping and get ready for really future add-in development, including what I was promising at the end of the last session, which is producing some templates to make it easier to get started. So the first thing I want to do is add a new tag. So if you want to follow along in the future, you can do that. So we'll call this Extending the Visio. Actually, we'll just call it Extending the Add-ins. I'll do the work for Visio and then separately follow along and do the work for Excel, but we'll just be calling this Extending the Add-ins. So we got a new tag now. And one thing I noticed is in the Visio add-in project, I called the file Excel add-in. We don't want that. We'll call this Visio add-in, and the icons really don't matter. It's just to have a little bit of fun. What I want to do is jump out of Visual Studio for a minute, and I want to place the Visio add-in and Excel add-ins in their own solution folders so we can add additional assemblies and have it all together. So what I'm going to do is close Visual Studio, and let's go into the file system. And in the Excel add-in folder, let's create a new folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to take everything, and place it in the Excel add-in folder. We're going to do the same for the Visio add-in. And now when we open up the Visio add-in project, and save the solution file in the level above, and then we'll go into the Excel folder. This is perhaps not the easiest way of doing this, but the outcome we want is to give the ability to work on these add-ins as solutions. So now what we have is in the top level folder we have a solution file, same in the Visio add-in. And so what I'm going to do now is in VSTO training, we'll just change this to add one more layer in here. And so now, with a little bit of luck, if we open up the VSTO add-in solution, we should be basically back to where we were. But in the future, when you're working just on the Visio add-in, you'll open up that solution file and you'll be able to keep everything together. So the next thing I want to do is add a new project. And this is just going to be a C# class library. So we'll call this Excel add-in application, and I'll explain what I'm doing here, why I'm doing it in just a minute. So we're going to put this in the Excel add-in folder. We don't have the ability to pick .NET 4.8.1 here, but we'll address that in just a second. And then we'll do the same thing for Visio. And if we open up these, we're going to just change this to net 481. Now what I want to do is go into the Excel add-in. We're going to add a new project reference. So we'll add a project reference to the Excel add-in application. We've already got a reference to the VSTO add-in. We did that, I think, in the previous. Actually, where is it? Oh, there it is. Yep. And then we'll do the same for the Visio add-in. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to do a little bit of refactoring. I want to take the, we want to do three things. I want to take the ribbon and just move it to the top level folder. I'm going to do all this and then kind of highlight why we're doing this. So we don't need the presentation folder anymore. We're going to take the events from the Excel add-in and drag it into the Excel add-in application folder. And yep. So we don't need that anymore. It's going to be in this Excel add-in application class. We'll do the same thing with the Visio add-in. And we're going to go and add a new folder. Call this Actions. Okay. So we don't need this. So I'm going to go ahead and compile this. We're going to get a whole bunch of compile errors, but we'll work through and fix those. So I'm going to start a compile. I realized as I was going back and editing the video down that I kind of skipped a little bit of the work to make the build, the compile work. So let me just quickly run you through the files that I had to change. Really minor changes, but I just don't want you to get frustrated. So in the common file from the, no, that's right. So in the Visio add-in project, the original project, we used to have a class called common. It now, instead of just being a class that derived from VNC VSTO add-in common, it derives from our new Visio add-in application common class. And the Visio add-in application common class derives from VNC VSTO add-in common. So basically, this line came from this file, we moved it over here, and this file is now inheriting from the common class from the new add-in application. So really simple change. And then the other thing is the Visio app events field called app events moved from this file over here. So basically inherit, get the inheritance right and move the events file over. So that's one change. Another change, actually I don't think there are any changes in this add-in file. So hopefully I didn't forget something. And then the last thing that needed to be done, when I recall dragged the events folder from Visio add-in down to, where is it? Visio add-in application, the events folder right here. Visual Studio does not rename the namespace. So this needed to be changed to the name of the assembly. It came across as Visio add-in. And I think that's it. So when if you are following along, certainly no need to, but if you are following along and typing this in, you'll want to make those changes to get the compile to work. All right, well, everything seems to work, but let me prove that to you. So let's open up the assembly file for the Excel add-in and the assembly file for the VSTO add-in. And we're going to go change the date to today. This is an example of something I've moved away from, the assembly info files in the properties folder. You can easily do that with SDK projects. You can still use them, but I've moved away and just keep everything in the SDK project. But you have to kind of hang on to this legacy stuff for VSTO add-ins. So let's go run the Visio one. Display add-in info. There we go. 622A. That's today's date. Run the Excel one. 622A. All right. So before we go any further, let's go check all this stuff in. So I use TortoiseGit. You can go look at the changes using any tool you're comfortable with. But what we did is we created some new solution files. We moved the project file into a subfolder. We've moved the ribbons. Where's the ribbons stuff? We've moved the ribbons out of presentation up to the top level folder. So you can go use your favorite Git log tool to go see the changes if you want to see what happened. But at the end of the day, we've added new assemblies projects that are referenced by the add-ins we're building, and all the extensions we're going to build are going to be in these new ones. So we're going to come back here and start working on the Visio add-in. I think I've already gone and created an actions folder. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go add a new class. Move these to the Visio side of our project. And actually, since I'm not going to be working on the Excel add-in anymore, let's just go ahead and close everything out. And then let's open up these files. And so let's open up the Visio app events file. And there's some cleanup I want to do here, but we'll cover that in a minute. Okay. So in the app events, Visio app events class, there's a method called route shapesheet QueueMarkerEvent. So there's different ways that you can interact with code in Visio. There's probably many ways, but there's two ways. From the ribbon, you can call some code directly, and we saw examples of that in the last lesson. The other thing you can do is in a shape is you can create an action. We're going to see all this in a minute. You can create an action that uses something called a QueueMarkerEvent, and what this method does is it handles that event. In fact, if we go back up here, so this is the event handler, Visio application marker event. And this existed before, but this is a out-of-the-box Visio event. It's called a marker event. And the method that I've created to handle this just kind of tells you what got called, and then we'll talk about context strings in a minute. But the gist of it is it calls route shapesheet QueueMarkerEvent. So we're going to come back and we're going to be using that now. So we're going to come down here And what we're going to do is we're going to go implement these 5 actions to handle things that are triggered by shapes. So what I'm going to do, let's go uncomment these. Declare a method. We'll put this over here so we can kind of see this happen. And we'll trace through so you can see exactly what's going on when these get called. But for now, let's just go get something in place. All right, so now we've got in Visio page, we haven't added anything to Visio document, but it's the same idea. Anything that's related to the document, we'd put it in the Visio document class. So we'll just move this over. Okay, so in Visio page, we've got 4 methods. And what we're going to do okay. And in the shape one, let's go put some breakpoints in. Okay, so let's go ahead and start our VisioAddin. So I've created a bunch of stencils over the years, and I can do a separate little section on where you can get these from. But in a folder called Napkin Making Page Shapes, in fact, let's just do that real quick. So if we go to Visio Options, there's actually 2 places. In Save, you can set, and I'm not sure if you have to set both, but that's what I typically do. So in a folder on my machine called Visio, well, Office Visio Templates, I happen to store this on OneDrive, but whatever. I have a location for personal templates, and then in Advanced, all the way down at the bottom, File Locations. And for templates and stencils, I use the same location. And because I've set those, let's go ahead and look at that real quick. So B colon is mapped to this, and that's a whole separate conversation. But in this folder on my OneDrive, there's a folder called Napkin Making, and in Napkin Making there's a stencil called Page Shapes. So that file is what we're looking at here. And we're going to, there's a whole bunch of masters in here, but we're just going to do a page link rounded. And I'm just going to ignore all this. We can talk more about this, but if I right click, show shape sheet, and if you don't see that, you have to where is this? Run in developer mode. So if you run in developer mode, you get a little bit more stuff in the UI, including the show shape sheet command. So if I right click on this, click on Show Shape Sheet, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, but try not to get lost. Just look at this line right here. So there is a action on this shape called Create Activity Page. The name of it doesn't matter, but the important thing is it calls this, I think it's called a function, whatever, run add-on with args, and the name is QueueMarkerEvent, and it's going to pass in some parameters, create page for shape, and you can see here there's some commas, and it's going to pass in something called page base with some spaces. So if we right click on the shape, there's an action called create page for shape, and I didn't practice this, so if we call this, actually let's change this. I'm gonna drop it on, so the name of the page will be called Molly. It's the name of a new cat of mine, and I'm not going to set anything here. It will default to a hyperlink on the shape called Molly, so we'll just leave that, and we're going to kind of ignore all this other stuff for a moment. And so you'll see the shape filled in Molly, and because I didn't put something else in, populated the hyperlink with Molly. If we right click and go to, there's the action, there's the Molly hyperlink, there's no place for it to go. But more importantly is if we call this create page for shape by clicking on it, and let's get this out of the way. So we've hit the Visio application marker event, so we're just going to bump the count, and you can look up here to see how I'm parsing things, but I'm just basically peeling off the information that came from the context string, which is that part at the end. So we'll come back and look at Visio, but what we're going to do is we're going to show that in the watch window. Not very interesting. If there is a context string, we're going to split it by spaces. So we're going to get doc, page, shape sheet, and then that string. We're going to see the context that came in. And then we're going to go down into route Q marker shape. So we're going to display all the stuff in the watch window. So we're going to skip down here. We'll put a breakpoint here. You can go and trace through this code yourself. But it's going to determine that we want to access the create page for shape. So a switch statement called create page for shape. I thought, oh, I didn't put a breakpoint here. That's fine. And the magic, because this code already existed, is that's more stuff to explain. It created a new page called Molly. So we right-clicked on this shape. We called create page for shape. The code created a new page. It put a link on that page for how we got here. Sometimes that's handy to have, sometimes you don't need it, so just go ahead and delete that. It created a link back to page 1, which is where we came from. So all that magic happened because on this shape we have an action called create page for shape, which called that code. So let's go through and see what that code does. But what we're trying to understand here is how you can use the run add-on with args function to call the QueueMarkerEvent action event, and then pass in a string, and in this case it's delimited with columns, that can be used to do more things. You don't need additional parameters, so there's many shapes that I have, and all it does is just calls one single thing. In fact, let's go see if I can find this real quick. I think it's layer toggle. So this shape has 3 actions on it, and you know that actually has 4 actions on it. Toggle layer visibility, toggle layer lock, toggle layer print, update layer. If we look at the shape sheet, it's a little confusing because that's the one from the page. So here's the 4 actions: visibility, lock, print, update. Calls QueueMarkerEvent, and the only thing it has here is the name of the method in the code to call. So if we go back and look at the code, toggle layer lock, toggle layer print, toggle layer visibility, toggle layer lock, toggle layer visibility, toggle layer print, and update layer. I guess we should go implement that one too. So we'll come back to the code. We'll go ahead and stop the code. Okay, let's take all these breakpoints out. Go run the add-in again. Actually, you know what? Instead of using these page shapes, let me just show you so you don't think there's any magic going on here, and we'll go create some out-of-the-box shapes. We'll assign them to a layer called cats. Drag on this layer toggle shape, which has the actions in it. And if we go to my cool stuff, display add-in, and oops, sorry, developer mode. Let's open up, I forget where I'm logging this. Let's open up the 2 windows, and there really is no difference between the windows. I guess one way of thinking about it is I'm trying to follow the convention that if I'm just watching events, they should go to the watch window if I'm debugging something, but it really doesn't matter. So if we right-click on toggle layer visibility, oops, I said I took all the breakpoints out, so we're hitting toggle layer visibility. We're right into the debug window, and if we come back to Visio, there, we can see we called toggle layer visibility, and we hit the QueueMarkerEvent, and we're passing in the first document, first page, shape, sheet 4, and we're calling the method, we're passing toggle layer visibility to the QueueMarkerEvent, and if we toggle the layer visibility back on, the shapes reappear. So that's an example of a shape that's got multiple actions. Calling some code. And the reason it works is not because we've implemented the code. You might be confused. The reason it's actually toggling things on and off is I have support tools, Visio also loaded. And so the event's actually going to both add-ins. If we go here to options, add-ins, and we turn off support tool Visio, all that stuff goes away, and my suspicion is toggle layer visibility is not going to do anything because we haven't implemented the code, but we are getting the marker event. So let's go see what the code is to turn those on and off. All right, let's go confirm where we are. We'll start with the Visio app. So we've got our add-in open, and we're going to go get the layer toggle shape. We'll just call it cats for now. And what we want to be able to do is turn things on and off based on the layer they're on. In fact, let's spend just a moment here kind of walking through the problem I was trying to solve, which is being lazy. So come here, put a few shapes on the canvas. We'll pick the two ellipses. We'll create a new shape called cats. And now, if we come to the layers area, layer properties, and we turn off the visibility of cats, oops, we must not have put that one on the cats layer, turn off the visibility of dogs, the shapes become invisible. So perfectly reasonable interface in Visio, but what I wanted to be able to do is accomplish this without having to do so many clicks and just do it directly from the canvas. So if we right click on toggle layer visibility, we see that the event is being raised, QueueMarkerEvent, and we're printing out the debug message toggle layer visibility. So let's go implement the code to make the shapes actually become invisible. Right now all we have is a debug message, so let's replace that with some code. I'm just copying this in from Support Tools Visio, but saves us a little bit of time. So let's kind of walk through what this code does. So the first thing we do is just print out the method we're in. Not particularly interesting. I use that for debugging. We get the active shape, which is a Visio shape type object, from the app active page shapes collection, and we use the passed in name of the shape. We get the active page, which is a page object, from the app active page. And then we get from our shape the value of the layer property, which is the layer name that we're looking for. We loop across the layers in the page. Once again, a little extra debugging, all that can go away, but this way you can kind of see what's going on. And if the layer name matches the one that we specified in our shape, we get the current state of the layer. If it's 0, we set it to 1. Otherwise, we set it to 0. So we toggle the state. And then we use the layer visibility property of the section viz cell indices for that layer to set it to the new state, and then we update the value in the property in our layer state. So if we go back and run the add-in again, so back in Visio I've created two layers, cats and dogs, and they're both visible. I've assigned the ellipses to the cat shape. And I've assigned the dogs to the dog shape. So if we use the UI and we turn off cats, cats disappear, turn off dogs, dogs disappear. I've dragged two shapes on, two layer toggle shapes, named one cats, named one dogs. So the cats one currently has visible, lock, and print set to true, as does the dog one. So if we right click on the cat shape, toggle layer visibility, the cats disappear, the property in that shape gets set to false. If we right click on dogs, the dogs disappear, and you'll notice in the shape there's little icons that indicate the state of things, and I'll zoom in on the video, but it shows that the visibility is not set. So if we toggle it back on, you can see right there the visibility is set. So this is a pretty simple example, but imagine you're doing architectural diagrams and you're trying to hide detail real quick. You're doing a presentation. You don't want to be coming up to layers and futzing around there. You can just use these layer toggles to do all the changes you want. And if you're wondering, well, how do you figure out what code to call? Standard thing, record a macro, perform the operations, go look at the code behind, and then move that into your VSTO-addin. So we've implemented layer visibility. Let's go implement toggling whether the layer is locked or it is printed out. So here's the code for print, which is virtually identical code with just a few exceptions. We use the layer print cell index versus the layer visible. We update the print property in the cell. I don't know if I showed you that. Let's go look at the shape sheet real quick. So there's 4 shape data values: layer, visible, lock, and print, and those are what we're updating in the code. So the layer name is cats, visible is set to 1 or true, and finally we'll go back. And you'll notice, as I said, the code is virtually identical. So instead of maintaining all that duplicate code, let's go do a little bit of refactoring. Let's go create a new method. Toggles the layer setting. It takes the active page, the active shape, the cell you want to update, and the name of the property you want to update. And then what we can do is we can replace all this code with this line. Oops, we need those. So we're passing in the active page and active shape. We're using the visibility cell, and we're updating the visible shape data property. So we'll do the same for these two. So now we'll restart the add-in, run it again, and see that we didn't break anything. All right, let's turn off the visibility of the cats, turn off the visibility of the dogs. Looks like we're in good shape. And just so you can see it, we'll toggle print. On the dogs, we'll toggle lock on the cats, and if we come back to layers, the dogs is not going to print, and nothing is locked. If we go toggle lock on the dogs, lock is true, And we must have made a mistake in the code. Let's go check what we've done there. So print, oh, well, of course it doesn't work. There's our lock code. So there you go. That's how you can adjust the layer visibility, print, and lock state using the shape, using the QueueMarkerEvent, and calling some code in your code behind. All right, let's look at a couple more things that I added to Support Tools Visio that I think you'll be generally interested in. So one thing that I found myself doing often is I had a stencil that provided some text that I was going to put at the top of a page that I would like to be automatically set to the name of the page. So page 1, because what I'd have to do is I'd have to come up here, type in page 1. Sure, I could have put data behind the field and had a UI pop up, but I wanted that to just happen automatically. So that's one thing I'm going to show you. Another thing that used to drive me nuts is I would create a new page, multiple pages. Doesn't even matter if you've created a new page. You go to a page that you had previously zoomed in. So we've really zoomed in on page 2 now. And let's go zoom in on page 1. We go back to page 1, and it's a little confusing, like what am I looking at? And then you realize, oh, I'm really zoomed in. So you would click on zoom, what is the pop-up? Fit page to current window. Go back to page 2. So I found myself going down here and clicking this all the time. And I thought, you know what? By default, most often when I go to a page in Visio, I want to be able to see the whole page and then zoom in if I needed to. So to implement those things, I checked to see if there was any events that I could use. So I'm going to clear our watch window. So when I switch pages, I'm getting this window turn to page event. And when I drop a shape on, I'm getting a shape added event. So let's go add some code to those and see if we can automate our way out of this mess. Okay, so for the shape added event, which is going to get fired every time you drop a new shape on the page, we're going to go add some code called handle shape added. And if we go to the definition of that, it's a pretty simple method. It gets past the shape, and of course we're debugging. There's a property on the shape that is the master that we'll go see in a minute. I go see if that exists. There's a user property is page name. If that exists, I set a variable, and if it's true, then I get the value from the cell is page name, and I set the shape's text to the name of the page. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is when we get the window turned to page event, we don't have to call anything. We can just do it right here. We set the window view fit property to be vis window fit vis fit page. So I set a breakpoint here. Oops. And I'll set a breakpoint there. Let's fire it up. Okay, so we've got the code in place to handle the automatic zooming of the pages. So if I click on page 2, the event's going to fire. Click on page 1, the event's going to fire. So I'm going to take the breakpoint out. And we'll zoom in on page 1 to something that makes it look like a blank page. Zoom in on page 2 to something that makes it look like a blank page. Now watch what happens when we go back to page 1. Automatically zooms to the full size. It fits to the window. Automatically fits to the window. So I just found that so much easier to understand what was I looking at. And then if I needed to zoom in, I would just zoom in as necessary. One thing I found myself doing on a pretty regular basis when I was creating documentation is putting some kind of title at the top of the page. So I created a master. It's in the page shape stencil. And it had some text, and what I used to do is I'd come to the text, change it to the name of the page, drag it into place. Actually, yeah, drag it into place. So that was okay, but kind of tedious. What would have been really nice is when I dragged it on, is if it automatically renamed itself to the name of the page. There's an event called ShapeAdded that fires every time you add a shape to the page. So let's go implement some code and make this a little bit easier on ourselves. Okay, code's in place. Let's watch it in action. So we drag the shape on, we hit the ShapeAdded event, which calls handle ShapeAdded. Go over to that. Handle ShapeAdded gets past the shape. We check to see if the shape has a user-defined cell called as page name. If it does, then, and maybe this is unnecessary, but I check to see if user is page name's value is greater than 0, so like true, and if so, get the app, get the page, and set the shape text to be the name of the page. So if we take the breakpoint off so we can go back and see the result, it automatically, as we drag this on, changed the text to be page 1. If we look at the shape sheet, there's user is page name. Looks like we got a little extra user-defined stuff we don't need. So user is page name's value is 1. So for those of you familiar with Visio, what's happening will not be a surprise to you at all, because behind the scenes, and those that know about this will smile, those that don't might be shocked, Visio has a somewhat hidden stencil called Document Stencil, and it is the stencil that is actually used to populate items on the page. So if you make a change to a shape, it really doesn't affect any future shapes. So I tried duplicating Now let's go look at this real quick. If we edit this master shape, its user is page name is 0, so presumably this one is not going to automatically update. So if I drag it on, result U, meaning the value of the cell, is not true, so the page name didn't re-update. If we go update the document stencil master, set this to 1. So the more I think about this, I don't know that I think it's sufficient to just have a user-defined cell that says is page name. I don't think I really need to check the value. I think that's overkill. Now if we drag it on, it's not updating. Oh, I didn't save it. Yes, drag it on. It is updating, so you've just convinced me that we don't need this code. We are just going to, if we have an is page name shape, if the cell exists, then we will Okay, so while we're at it, let's go improve this master. So we're going to define some shape data, call this text size. It's going to be a number, the format's going to be 0.0, the default value is going to be 18, that's what I just about always use. Ask on drop, we could do that, but I so rarely change this, but if you want to have it ask you what size you want. And then we'll go we already know we don't need that row, so we'll get rid of that row. We'll leave the isPageName flag. We'll come down here and say we want to guard this so it doesn't get stepped on. Guard text, actually prop.textSize times 1 point. And then we're going to, we'll dynamically adjust the text height using the text and the width of the shape. So now, if we come over here and tweak this up to 48, that looks good. Tweak it down to, so you're going to still have to move it around, but that's a much better implementation. So we'll drag this over to the stencil. We'll rename it. And let's really go fancy. Sizable page header. So now when we drag this on, we get automatic renaming of the text. We've got the ability to dynamically size it. So you'll have to decide if it's easier to have these where you can, just kind of drag it into place, or a dynamic one. But anyway, that's a workflow I often do. I get something that I sort of like, and then I make improvements to it. And I think, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so how does the code work? Well, if we come back to the code and we go to ShapeAddit, it calls the method handleShapeAddit. Actually, I think we already talked about that, so maybe we actually finished this recording. For those of you that see no evidence of planning before these videos were recorded, that's actually not true. I try to take notes and sort of stick to my outline. Unfortunately, I've completely gotten away from that in this recording. My apologies. I decided to pause things for a bit and go for a swim. I'm retired, and so I have the luxury of just dropping everything and going and doing something different. So when I was swimming, I was thinking about how much the sizable page header shape still is pretty sucky. So I made some changes, and let's go ahead and take a look at that. So we're going to go edit the master shape. Look at the shape sheet. And the character text size is still coming from the property text size. And for those of you that have noticed, when I say property text size, it's in the shape data section. For some reason, Visio calls the cells inside of the shape data, they call them prop cells. You notice here user defined is user cell, so the UI is slightly different. I sometimes will say shape data, sometimes I'll say properties. I mean this section here. The changes I've made are to the width, which is now dynamically going to size itself based on the page width. If you've been following along this lesson or this whole episode, you'll notice that when you drop this onto a portrait size page, because I do most of my work in landscape, the shape was too wide, so it's now going to dynamically size itself to the width of the page minus the 2 margins. And then it's going to place itself in the middle of the page, so page width divided by 2, and it's horizontally, and then it's going to vertically place itself at the top of the page minus the width of the top margin and half the height. So notice that I left the width unguarded in case you want to resize the width. Don't know why you would, but just note that you can. The location, I assume you always want it tucked in at the top. You could take the guard cells away if you want to be able to manually adjust it after the fact. So we'll close that. So now when we drop this, I'm just going to drop it in the middle. It places itself up at the top of the page. If we change the size of the text, it automatically resizes and adjusts the bounding box. If we create a new page and change the orientation to portrait, so we have a narrower page now. Oops. Once again, snaps up to the top and properly places itself at the very top. So now I think that's a more useful shape, and I deleted all the other ones that were tied to a specific size because there really is no reason for one now. So that's an example of, over time, improving your masters to where they behave even more the way you want. Okay, so for the last part of this episode, let's go look at something that will hopefully make more sense now that you've seen some of the work with pages automatically sizing, pages dynamically renaming certain shapes based on the name of the page. So we're going to drag on one of these link shapes, and they all basically work the same: page link cloud, page link oval, rounded, rectangle, left and right arrows. The only thing that's different is the shape. So we're going to call the page cats, and by default, if you don't type in something different, it'll set the hyperlink to be the same name as the shape, and it's going to use the page shapes stencil, page link arrow left to be the return shape, and you'll see in just a minute what return shape is. So we're going to right click, create page for shape. So there's the left arrow, but oh my gosh, I was expecting a little bit more. Oh, I think I understand what happened. Let me just move this out of the way for a second, and I'll tease you with what the code does. Code is executing. It will look for, in page shapes, a shape called 18-point header, and it will automatically drop that on the page. But remember, in the last section, we created a new master called sizable page header, so we're going to have to change this to sizable page header. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. Okay, so let's do that again. Let's drag a new shape on. We'll call this dogs. I changed it to sizable page header. Hopefully this is going to work now. There we go. So now what we have is we have a new page, dogs, and the shape we used is dropped in the middle of the page. Sometimes that's helpful to have, sometimes it's not. I'll just go ahead and delete it. And why is this bloody window getting in the way? Go ahead. There we go. So we have a link, we have a shape dropped on the new page called dogs that points back to the page our original link was on. So if I hold down the control key, navigate, so now we're back on page 1, hold down the control key, navigate to dogs. When the page got created, a sizable page header automatically got added to the top of the page. So we've got a nice little header there. We didn't have to do anything extra for that. And the header, of course, as we know, can be resized. And there's one more feature, but in order to understand that, we have to go add a page, and the name matters, page base. We're actually going to go add 2 pages and another page called navigation links, and the names do matter. We're going to change that to a background page. We're going to change this to a background page, and on this I'm just going to put something silly on here. This text should always appear on any page using page base as a background. Okay, so let's actually do one more thing. Let's come to navigation links. I'm just going to do this and really not explain it. Just dragging this little cluster of links from page shapes. I'm going to ungroup it. and I'll explain what it does in a minute. So now if we come back, so let's go ahead and use page link rounded, and we'll call this birds. Create page for shape. So this should all now look familiar. Let me just get this bloody window out of the way. So we have a link back to page 1. We've got the birds shape dropped on if we need it. We have a header placed at the top. We have text from page base appearing, and up here in this corner we've got some links. The most important one for now is this N. So now back on the birds, if we click on the N, we go to the navigation link page. So where that can be handy is you can drag other navigation links up here, and anything that appears on the navigation link page, and by convention it's only navigation links, these are just really small ones, will appear on any new page you create. So this capability of creating a page from a shape comes with the benefits of using page base, using navigation links, and getting you pretty far along into a navigable Visio drawing. That, I think, is gonna be it. I had talked about doing templates. I think we're gonna push that into the next episode, so thank you very much for hanging in there. We covered a lot of material, and hopefully you got some benefit from it. Thank you.